The White House has been working to boost public transportation and expand the use of trucks that run on natural gas. Well, how much can those efforts really lower greenhouse gas emissions? That was the question, or one question, before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee yesterday. Clean Skies Dan Goldstein is here with a wrap-up of that. Good morning, Dan.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, while the overall cap and trade plan might be on hold till September, that doesn't mean the Obama administration hasn't been aggressive in their view about reducing greenhouse gas emissions in other sectors where they think they can do so without necessarily a tough vote on something like cap and trade. And one of those key areas is the transportation sector, where about 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions originate, and most of them come from light trucks and cars, but also heavy 18-wheelers and the aviation industry. And that's where Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood has focused his efforts. The biggest component, basically boosting corporate fuel economy standards, or CAFE standards, for light trucks to more than 35 miles a gallon by 2016. There's a lot more, he said, the Transportation Department will do. And here's a little what he had to say to the Environment and Public Works Committee yesterday.
Clearly, we must take action to make all forms of transportation more fuel efficient while stepping up efforts to introduce low carbon fuels and alternative power sources for all types of vehicles, from cars and trucks to buses and rail systems. We are coordinating with the Environmental Protection Agency to develop new coordinating tailpipe emissions and fuel economy standards for 2012 through 2016. And we are leveraging technology to better manage traffic congestion and other factors that directly affect fuel consumption and emission.
Now, the EPA, too, is looking at ways to cut transportation emission. Their big emphasis is on biofuels, including cellulosic ethanol, corn ethanol, and biodiesel, which has to have at minimum a 20% reduction over emissions over gasoline. But the EPA is working hand in glove with DOT, especially on fuel economy standards, and that's exactly what the EPA told the Senate yesterday.
In May, President Obama announced a new national policy to establish for the first time uniform federal standards to regulate both fuel economy and greenhouse gas emissions from cars and light-duty trucks. This historic policy reflects unprecedented collaboration and consensus between the federal government, states, and private industry. EPA and the DOT are working together to develop this program. The benefits of these standards will be significant, bringing about cumulative greenhouse gas reductions of approximately 900 million metric tons and fuel savings of approximately 1.8 billion barrels.
Now, along with DOT, the EPA is also looking at ways to cut transportation emissions too, and they point out that even if CAFE standards rose to 55 miles per gallon by 2030, it would only have a modest effect on vehicle emissions. So get used to hearing this a lot. VMT, that stands for Vehicle Miles Traveled. And both the Department of Transportation and the EPA want to limit the growth in VMT by building housing much closer to public transit, something called transit-oriented development, or TOD, something that people here in Washington metro area are very accustomed to. A lot of acronyms there, but the EPA says that's the best way to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions, by having people walk to work or bicycle or take light rail to their jobs.
Providing incentives to reduce the number of miles we drive must also be part of the solution. Investments in public transportation and making communities more walkable results in less driving, less petroleum use, and fewer greenhouse gas emissions.
Now, one final note, Susan, as we mentioned, one of the biggest ways to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions is to get folks out of their cars and onto public transportation. So expect to hear a lot about this, light rail. A lot of cities have eliminated their light rail systems in the 1960s and such, but including this city, Washington, they're actually bringing them back. And yesterday, the Senate committee heard from a number of cities like Salt Lake City in Utah and Portland, Oregon, which are busy rebuilding their light rail system. Susan, back to you.
All right, we'll see how much people want to get out of their SUVs and get on the train. Also, Dan, we hear a lot about trucking companies wanting to get a break from high diesel prices, convert some of their rigs to natural gas.
Yeah, right. And the trucking industry spent more than $150 billion last year on diesel fuel alone. That was a 50% jump on what it spent 2 years ago, according to the American Trucking Association. So they're looking at alternatives, including converting some of their rigs to run on cheaper natural gas. But they point out that as 71% of the nation's goods move by truck, any greenhouse gas reduction program in the transportation sector that basically puts more costs onto them could break the back of their business and increase costs onto consumers.
All right, Dan Goldstein, thank you.